I am Rosalind, 32 years old, and last year I graduated from medical school alongside my twin sister Charlotte. We grew up in a middle-class family in Boston, with parents who always emphasized the importance of education. What I never expected was to discover that my parents had paid off Charlotte's $250,000 medical school debt while leaving me drowning in mine. I had always felt second best, but this betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Before I share what happened at Charlotte's debt-free celebration, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Growing up in suburban Boston, Charlotte and I were fraternal twins who couldn't have been more different. While we shared the same birthday and home, Charlotte was always naturally gifted. She could skim through a textbook once and ace a test while I spent hours highlighting, making flashcards, and reviewing material repeatedly to achieve the same grades. Our parents, James and Margaret Wilson, never explicitly said they preferred Charlotte, but their actions spoke volumes. On our birthday, Charlotte would receive the latest gaming system or laptop she wanted, while I would get practical items like clothes or school supplies. When report cards came home with identical straight A's, my father would ruffle Charlotte's hair and say, "That's my girl," while my mother would simply nod at my report and say, "Good job, Rosalind, keep it up." These small differences accumulated over the years. I developed a perfectionist streak and work ethic that bordered on obsessive. If perfect grades didn't earn me the same love and attention Charlotte received effortlessly, perhaps even better achievements would. I joined more clubs, volunteered more hours, and pushed myself relentlessly. Our father ran a successful cardiology practice in downtown Boston. From an early age, he made it clear that he hoped we would follow in his footsteps. The Wilson medical legacy, he called it, though there was really no legacy yet since he was the first doctor in our family. Charlotte showed interest in medicine from an early age, collecting toy stethoscopes and wearing a lab coat for Halloween 3 years in a row. I initially resisted the idea of becoming a doctor, not because I wasn't interested, but because it felt like another way I would be compared to Charlotte and found wanting. But during my sophomore year of high school, I shadowed a trauma surgeon for a school project, and something clicked. I loved the fast pace, the problem solving, and most of all, the direct impact on people's lives. I decided then that I would become a doctor not for my father's approval, but because I had found my calling. In our senior year of high school, both Charlotte and I were accepted to prestigious undergraduate programs with academic scholarships. My parents threw a party, inviting extended family and friends. During the toast, my father raised his glass and announced, "Today, we celebrate Charlotte's acceptance to Brown University with a full ride scholarship." After applause died down, he added almost as an afterthought, "And Rosalind will be attending Boston University with a partial scholarship." What no one knew was that my scholarship actually covered a larger percentage of my tuition than Charlotte's did for her more expensive school. But that detail wasn't important to the narrative my parents had constructed. College continued the pattern. During family dinners, my parents would ask Charlotte detailed questions about her class's professors and campus life. When they turned to me, the questions were cursory, as if they were simply being polite. Even when I made the dean's list every semester and was invited to join a competitive research program, my accomplishments were acknowledged with brief congratulations, while Charlotte's B+ in organic chemistry warranted a celebratory dinner to recognize her perseverance through a challenging course. I made close friends in college who saw me for who I was. My roommate Amelia often expressed outrage on my behalf after witnessing interactions with my family. "Do they even realize what they're doing?" she would ask. I would shrug and say, "They don't mean to. They just think Charlotte is special." But deep down, I wondered if there was something fundamentally unlovable about me, some flaw, that made me less worthy of their attention and affection. Despite everything, Charlotte and I maintained a close relationship. She wasn't malicious or calculating, she was simply accustomed to being the favorite, and didn't seem to notice the disparity in how we were treated. In many ways, she was my biggest cheerleader, bragging to her friends about my accomplishments and seeking my help when she struggled. This made it impossible to resent her completely, which only complicated my feelings about our family dynamic. By the time senior year of college arrived, both Charlotte and I had completed our pre-med requirements and were preparing to apply to medical school. I had slightly better grades and MCAT scores, but we were both strong candidates. As we sat at the kitchen table during winter break discussing our applications, our parents joined us. Girls, my father said, your mother and I are so proud of both of you for pursuing medicine, but we need to have a practical discussion about finances. The conversation about financing medical school was one I had been dreading. Medical school would cost roughly $60,000 per year for tuition alone, not counting living expenses. Multiply that by 4 years and 2 daughters, and my parents were looking at nearly $500,000. We want to help both of you equally, my mother said, folding her hands on the table. But we need to be realistic about what we can contribute. My father nodded in agreement. We've set aside some money for your educations, but it won't cover everything. You'll both need to take out loans, but we'll help with repayment after you graduate. I felt a sense of relief. The acknowledgement that they would treat us equally financially gave me hope that perhaps in this one area I wouldn't be second best. When acceptance letters arrived, Charlotte and I were both admitted to Tufts University School of Medicine. My parents hosted another gathering to announce our acceptances. This time my father raised his glass and said, "To both our daughters following in the Wilson medical tradition." It was the first time I could remember being equally included in a celebration, and I held on to that feeling like a precious gift. A few weeks later, I accidentally overheard my parents discussing finances in my father's home office. I had come downstairs for a glass of water and paused outside the door when I heard my name. Rosalind has always been so independent, my mother was saying. Charlotte will need more support during medical school. I agree, my father replied. Seriotid. Charlotte is brilliant, but she needs encouragement. Rosalind will power through regardless. I stood frozen in the hallway, a familiar ache spreading through my chest. Even when planning financial support, they viewed Charlotte as needing and deserving more. The official meeting about finances confirmed my fears. My parents explained that they had saved approximately $120,000 for our educations. We'll split it evenly, my father said. $15,000 per year for each of you. That amount would cover only about a quarter of our annual expenses. We would both need substantial loans to make up the difference. After graduation, we'll help you both with loan repayment as much as we can, my mother added, though something in her tone made me question the sincerity of that promise. Charlotte and I found an apartment together near campus. Before we moved in, my parents surprised Charlotte with a check to cover her portion of the security deposit and first month's rent. You need to focus on getting settled and prepared for classes, my mother told her. When I asked if they would be helping with my portion as well, my father looked surprised. We thought you had savings from your campus jobs, he said. I did have savings, but I had been hoping to keep them as an emergency fund. Instead, I depleted most of what I had before classes even started. The pattern continued as we purchased equipment and supplies. My parents bought Charlotte a new laptop and the most expensive set of medical tools. It's an investment in your future, they told her. Meanwhile, I bought a refurbished laptop and the standard set of tools with my credit card. During orientation, I learned about work-study opportunities at the medical school. While most students were advised to avoid working during the intensive first year, I knew I would need the income. I secured a position in the medical library for 12 hours per week, working evenings and weekends. Charlotte, meanwhile, could dedicate all her time to studying. When she called home, stressed about coursework, our parents would send care packages and offers to pay for tutoring. When I mentioned my own struggles balancing work and studies during a weekly phone call, my mother simply said, "You've always been good at managing your time, dear." By the end of our first semester, it was clear that despite starting medical school on supposedly equal financial footing, our experiences were vastly different. Charlotte's expenses were regularly supplemented by our parents, while I stretched every dollar and watched my loan balance grow with a sense of dread. Medical school was even more demanding than I had anticipated. The volume of information we needed to absorb was staggering, and the pace was relentless. For most students, medical school was their only focus, with every waking hour devoted to lectures, labs, study groups, and practice exams. For me, there was the additional pressure of working 15 to 20 hours per week. I had increased my library hours and also picked up occasional weekend shifts at a coffee shop near campus. My alarm went off at 4:30 each morning so I could review material before classes, and I often studied until midnight or later. Charlotte, free from financial concerns, joined study groups and attended optional seminars. When she found a particular subject challenging, she hired tutors, which our parents happily funded. "We just want you to have every advantage." I overheard my father tell her during a video call. Despite my grueling schedule, I maintained grades that matched or exceeded Charlotte's. The cost was my health and well-being. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and caught every cold that circulated on campus. Dark circles became a permanent feature under my eyes. During a family dinner in our second year, my aunt commented on my appearance. "Rosalind, are you taking care of yourself? You look exhausted." Before I could respond, my mother jumped in. "Rosalind has always pushed herself too hard. Charlotte has learned to maintain better balance." The irony of this statement, when Charlotte's balance was made possible by their financial support, was not lost on me, but I stayed silent, picking at my food, while Charlotte described her rewarding volunteer work at a community clinic, an opportunity I couldn't pursue because of my work schedule. My closest friend in medical school, Amelia Taylor, frequently witnessed these family dynamics firsthand. After one particularly painful family brunch, where my parents spent 45 minutes discussing Charlotte's clinical rotation, without asking me a single question about mine, Amelia pulled me aside. "This isn't normal, Rose," she said firmly. "The way they ignore your accomplishments while celebrating hers isn't right." "They've always been this way," I replied with a shrug I'd perfected to appear unbothered. "Charlotte's their star." "But you're literally getting better evaluations than she is," Amelia insisted. "Your clinical supervisor told me you're one of the most promising students he's had in years." I smiled weakly. "It doesn't matter. Nothing I do will ever shine quite as brightly as Charlotte existing." Midway through our third year, I developed severe pneumonia after weeks of exhaustion and stress. I ended up hospitalized for 4 days, my oxygen levels dangerously low. Amelia called my parents to inform them, and they expressed appropriate concern, saying they would come to the hospital right away. They never showed up. Later, I learned that Charlotte had called with a crisis of her own. She had failed a practice exam and was having an anxiety attack. My parents spent the evening at her apartment comforting her and arranging for an emergency tutoring session. By the time they remembered I was in the hospital, I had already been discharged and was recovering at Amelia's apartment. When I returned to classes, I had fallen behind and had to work twice as hard to catch up. My supervisor granted me an extension on clinical hours, which meant giving up my planned winter break. Charlotte spent that break skiing in Colorado, with our parents sending me selfies from the slopes, while I wore a mask through 12-hour hospital shifts to make up my required time. The financial disparity between us continued to grow. Our parents began paying Charlotte's rent entirely so she could focus on her studies. They bought her a car so she could safely get to her rotations. They paid for her to attend 3 medical conferences for the networking opportunities. Meanwhile, I took out additional loans to cover my living expenses. I calculated that I would graduate with approximately $75,000 more debt than Charlotte, even though we attended exactly the same program. During our final year, when we were applying for residency programs, Charlotte decided to follow our father's footsteps into cardiology. His connections in the field meant she received personalized letters of recommendation from department chairs and invitations to visit prestigious programs. I had fallen in love with emergency medicine, drawn to the variety of cases and the immediate impact of the work. When I shared this with my father, he barely concealed his disappointment. "Emergency medicine. That's certainly a respectable field, though I always saw you in something more academic." The subtext was clear. Emergency medicine was less prestigious than cardiology in his eyes. It didn't matter that it was the perfect specialty for my skills and temperament. It wasn't carrying on his specific legacy. By the time we neared graduation, the accumulated weight of years of unequal treatment had created a wall between Charlotte and me. She remained largely oblivious to her privileged position, occasionally complaining about the stress of expectations, while benefiting from a support system I could only dream of. When I finally gathered the courage to confront my parents about the disparity in their support, sitting them down during a rare visit home, they seemed genuinely confused. "We've always treated you both exactly the same," my mother insisted. "If anything, my father added. We've had to give Charlotte more attention because she's sensitive. You've always been so self-sufficient, Rosalind. I pulled out a spreadsheet I'd created documenting the financial differences in their support over the past 4 years. They glanced at it dismissively. You're imagining things, my father said, and keeping score like this is beneath you. I left that conversation feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. Had I imagined all of it, was I the problem for noticing the disparity? The gaslighting was almost worse than the favoritism itself. As graduation approached, I calculated my total debt, $280,000 in student loans that would take me at least 20 years to repay on a resident's salary. Charlotte's debt stood at $205,000, the difference representing the additional support she'd received throughout our education. Little did I know that even this disparity was about to be dramatically widened by a decision that would finally force me to confront the truth about my place in our family. Graduation day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance medical school could muster. Charlotte and I crossed the stage minutes apart, both of us now officially doctors of medicine. Our parents hosted a celebration at an upscale restaurant in Boston, inviting extended family and close friends. During the dinner, my father stood to make a toast. Today, we celebrate two extraordinary young women who have achieved something remarkable. Charlotte, who will be carrying on the Wilson tradition in cardiology at Massachusetts General Hospital. He raised his glass higher. And Rosalind, who will be joining Boston City Hospital's emergency department. The way he emphasized the hospitals made clear which placement he considered more prestigious, though in reality I had chosen Boston City specifically for its renowned emergency medicine program and diverse patient population. After dinner, my parents presented us with graduation gifts. Charlotte received a custom white coat embroidered with her name and an 18-karat gold caduceus pin studded with tiny diamonds that had belonged to our grandmother. I received a stethoscope and a gift card to a medical supply store. The value difference was obvious to everyone. My Aunt Catherine raised her eyebrows at me across the table, and I gave her a small smile that I hoped conveyed, "I'm used to it." 2 weeks after graduation, Charlotte and I moved out of our shared apartment. She had signed a lease for a luxury building near Massachusetts General, while I found a modest place with 2 roommates closer to my hospital. We were both scheduled to begin residency in Jalili, finally separating our educational paths after 26 years. I was unpacking boxes in my new bedroom when my phone rang. It was Charlotte, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Roz, you will not believe what Mom and Dad just did. I'm still in shock." "What happened?" I asked, sitting on my secondhand bed. "They paid off my student loans, all of them, every single penny. Can you believe it? $205,000 gone. I'm debt-free." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the mattress to steady myself. "What? How? When?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "They said it was a graduation present. They've been saving for years, apparently. Dad said it was important that I start my cardiology career without the burden of debt. I'm still processing it. I mean, can you imagine I don't have to worry about loan payments for the next 20 years? That's amazing," I said mechanically. "Have they mentioned anything about my loans?" There was a pause on the line. "Oh, I don't know actually. I assumed they were doing the same for you. They didn't say, well, no, nothing." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm sure they're planning something similar for you, Roz. Maybe they're just doing it separately." "Maybe," I replied, though I knew better. "Listen, I need to finish unpacking. Congratulations, that's really wonderful news." I ended the call and sat motionless on my bed, a box of kitchen utensils forgotten at my feet. $205,000. Enough to completely eliminate Charlotte's debt, while I would be paying nearly $300,000 plus interest for the next 2 decades. With shaking hands, I called my parents. My mother answered, sounding cheerful. "Rosalind, how's the new apartment getting all settled in?" "Charlotte just told me you paid off her student loans," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Oh," my mother sounded surprised. "Yes, we wanted to give her a fresh start. Your father is so proud to have her following in his footsteps." "What about my loans?" I asked directly. There was a brief silence before my father's voice came on the line he'd been listening on another extension. "Rosalind, you need to understand something. Charlotte is going into a challenging specialty with years of additional training ahead. Cardiology is demanding, and we didn't want financial stress distracting her. And emergency medicine isn't demanding? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I'll be working overnight shifts, holidays, weekends, handling everything from heart attacks to gunshot wounds. That's different, my father said dismissively. Besides, you've always been the independent one. You'll manage your debt just fine. Why didn't you at least discuss this with me? You've given her a $200,000 gift that I'm not receiving. How is that remotely fair? My mother sighed. Honey, life isn't always about everything being exactly equal. Nothing has ever been equal, I said, tears now flowing freely. Not once in our entire lives. There was a pause before my father spoke again, his voice carrying the final blow. She deserves it more, honey. She'll be continuing my legacy in cardiology. My mother added softly, You've always been more independent. We knew you'd be fine. I hung up without another word, then turned off my phone as it immediately began ringing again. I curled up on my bed and sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen. The next day, I called Amelia, who came over immediately with ice cream and wine. As I recounted the conversation, her expression shifted from shock to fury. This is beyond favoritism, Roz. This is emotional abuse. They've been gaslighting you for years, making you feel like you're imagining the unequal treatment, and now they've put a literal price tag on their preference for Charlotte, $205,000. Another friend from medical school, Jackson, joined us later that evening. He worked in financial aid and helped me calculate the long-term impact. With interest, I would end up paying back nearly $500,000 over 20 years. Charlotte would pay nothing. The thing is, Jackson said gently, there's no reason they couldn't have split that money between you. They could have given you each $100,000 toward your loans. That would still have been life-changing. The realization that they had the means to help both of us equally but chose not to was perhaps the most painful part. A week later, I received a text from Charlotte. Mom and Dad are throwing me a debt-free celebration party next Saturday. Please come. It would mean so much to have you there. I stared at the message in disbelief. They were actually throwing a party to celebrate paying off Charlotte's debt while I was picking up extra shifts to make my first loan payment. You should go, Amelia said when I showed her the text. But not to celebrate. To finally stand up for yourself. With her encouragement, I began to formulate a plan. This would be the moment I reclaimed my dignity and broke the pattern of silent acceptance that had defined my relationship with my family for 26 years. In the days following Charlotte's announcement about the party, I moved through my residency orientation in a fog. I smiled at appropriate moments, took notes during presentations, and introduced myself to colleagues, all while a storm brewed beneath the surface. Each night, I returned to my apartment and worked on my plan. I wasn't interested in revenge. Exactly what I wanted was recognition, acknowledgement of the pattern that had defined my life. I wanted my truth to be heard. My first step was to meet with Dr. Jensen, a therapist Amelia had recommended. What you're describing is a classic golden child and scapegoat dynamic, she explained during our first session. It's a dysfunctional family pattern that can cause deep, lasting damage to the scapegoated child. But why me? I asked the question that had haunted me for years. What did I do to deserve less love? Nothing, Dr. Jensen said firmly. This has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with your parents' issues. Some parents project their own insecurities onto one child while idealizing another. It's not about who you are, it's about who they needed you to be in their narrative. This perspective was revolutionary. For the first time, I began to see that the problem wasn't some fundamental flaw in me, but rather a dysfunction in my family system. With this new understanding, I began gathering documentation. I created a presentation showing the financial disparity between Charlotte and me. Throughout medical school, precise figures of parental contributions, gifts, and support. I calculated the long-term impact of starting my career with nearly $300,000 in debt versus Charlotte's debt-free beginning. Amelia and several other friends from medical school helped me refine my approach. You need to be calm and factual, Amelia advised. No accusations or emotional language, just the truth presented clearly. And you need to decide what you want from this, added Jackson. Are you looking for them to make things right financially? Or is this about setting boundaries going forward? I realized I had no expectation that my parents would suddenly decide to pay off my loans as well. That ship had sailed. What I wanted was honesty, the admission of the pattern, and the beginning of more authentic relationships. Through a cousin who worked at my father's practice, I learned that my parents had been planning to pay off Charlotte's loans for over a year. They had liquidated some investments specifically for this purpose. The decision had been made long before our graduation, which meant their statements about helping both equally with repayment had been deliberately misleading. I also discovered that Charlotte had known about the plan for months before telling me. She hadn't been keeping it secret maliciously, she simply assumed I was receiving the same gift and would be told in my own time. With each piece of information, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't about jealousy or entitlement. It was about decades of being treated as less than culminating in a financial disparity that would impact the next 20 years of my life. I met with a financial advisor at my hospital to discuss loan forgiveness programs. As an emergency physician working in an underserved urban hospital, I would qualify for partial loan forgiveness after 10 years of service. It wasn't a complete solution, but it offered some hope. The week before the party, I went shopping for a new outfit, something that would make me feel confident and powerful. I chose a tailored navy blue pantsuit that made me look every inch the doctor I had worked so hard to become. I rehearsed what I would say with Amelia, refining my words to be clear and unemotional. "Remember, this isn't about convincing them to change," she reminded me. "It's about standing in your truth." The night before the party, I called Charlotte. We hadn't spoken much since her announcement. My brief texts maintaining the facade that I was happy for her, while being too busy with residency to talk. "I just wanted to confirm I'll be there tomorrow," I told her. "Oh, I'm so glad," she exclaimed. "I was worried you might be on call." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, meaning it in a way she couldn't possibly understand. "It means a lot to have your support, Roz. You know how much I value our relationship." I closed my eyes, reminding myself that Charlotte wasn't the villain in this story. She was a beneficiary of our parents' dysfunction, but she hadn't created it. "I'll see you tomorrow," I said simply, and ended the call. That night I slept surprisingly well for the first time in weeks. There's a certain peace that comes with standing at the edge of a life-changing decision, knowing you've already decided to jump. Saturday arrived crisp and clear, a perfect New England summer day. I dressed carefully in my new suit, applied minimal makeup, and styled my hair in a professional updo. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Gone was the shadow who had accepted second place for 26 years. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth. I arrived at my parents' suburban home precisely on time. The driveway was already filled with cars, family, friends, and colleagues coming to celebrate Charlotte's financial freedom, as the banner hanging over the front door proclaimed. Taking a deep breath, I walked inside. The house was decorated with balloons and streamers in the Tufts University colors. A large cake on the dining room table was designed to look like a student loan bill with "paid in full" stamped across it in red. The irony was physically painful. Charlotte spotted me immediately and rushed over, enveloping me in a hug. "You came and you look amazing." "Congratulations," I said, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. My parents approached next, my mother kissing my cheek while my father gave me an awkward side hug. "Rosalind's so glad you could make it," my father said. "We weren't sure with your new residency schedule." "I wouldn't miss this celebration," I replied, maintaining eye contact until he looked away first. The party was in full swing, with about 30 guests mingling in the backyard and living room. I recognized aunts, uncles, family friends, and several of my father's colleagues from the hospital. Many congratulated me on my graduation and new position, asking about emergency medicine with genuine interest. My mother's sister, Aunt Catherine, pulled me aside. "You look different today, Rosalind." "More certain of yourself." I smiled. "I've gained some clarity recently." "Good," she said, squeezing my arm. "It's about time." After about an hour of small talk and forced smiles, my father clinked his glass for attention. Everyone gathered in the living room as he stood beside Charlotte, beaming with pride. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate this special day," he began. As many of you know, Charlotte has recently graduated from medical school and will be beginning her cardiology residency at Massachusetts General next week. Applause filled the room as Charlotte smiled modestly. What some of you may not know is that her mother and I decided to give Charlotte a very special graduation present. We have completely paid off her medical school loans, all $205,000. More applause and several gasps at the amount. We wanted to ensure that as she follows in my footsteps in cardiology, she can focus entirely on her training without the burden of debt. Margaret and I couldn't be prouder of the path she's chosen and the physician she's becoming. Not once did he mention me standing 5 feet away, also a newly graduated doctor. Not even a cursory acknowledgement of my achievement or existence. As the applause died down, I stepped forward. "Dad, would you mind if I say a few words as well?" He looked surprised but nodded, handing me the floor. I moved to the center of the room, aware of all eyes on me. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady when I spoke. For those who don't know me, I'm Rosalind Wilson Charlotte's twin sister. We graduated from Tufts Medical School together last month. I paused, meeting the eyes of various family members. I want to start by acknowledging what an extraordinary gift Charlotte has received. $205,000 is life-changing, and I'm sure everyone in this room with student loans can appreciate just how significant that is. People nodded, and I continued. What you might not know is that I am currently carrying $280,000 in student debt for the exact same education. A murmur ran through the crowd. Charlotte and I attended the same undergraduate and medical programs. We received the same scholarships. We earned nearly identical grades. The difference in our debt reflects the additional financial support Charlotte received throughout our education. I removed a folded paper from my pocket and opened it. I've prepared some information I'd like to share. This isn't about embarrassing anyone, it's simply about truth. I began reciting the figures I had meticulously documented, the rent payments made for Charlotte, but not me. The car purchased for her clinical rotations while I took public transportation. The tutors' conferences and extra equipment funded for her, while I worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. Over 4 years of medical school, our parents provided Charlotte with approximately $75,000 more in support than they provided me, not counting the final gift of paying off her loans entirely. The room had fallen completely silent. My parents stood frozen. My father's face flushed with anger and embarrassment, my mother staring at the floor. I am not sharing this information to ask for money. I've accepted that I will be paying my loans for the next 20 years. What I'm asking for is acknowledgement of a pattern that has existed our entire lives. I turned to face my parents directly. When I called to ask why Charlotte received this gift and I didn't, Dad told me, and I quote, "She deserves it more, honey. She'll be continuing my legacy in cardiology." Mom added, "You've always been more independent. We knew you'd be fine." Several people gasped. My father's colleague, Dr. Reynolds, looked particularly shocked, his gaze darting between my father and me. Charlotte had gone pale, her eyes wide. "They said that to you?" she whispered. I nodded before continuing. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn equal love and recognition through achievement, believing that if I just worked harder, I would finally be seen. Today, I'm stepping away from that pattern. I'm choosing to value myself even if my parents cannot." My grandmother, my father's mother, stood up from her seat in the corner. At 83, she rarely spoke at family gatherings anymore, preferring to observe. Everyone turned to look at her. "James," she said, her voice wavering but determined, "is this true? Have you treated Rosalind this way?" My father sputtered, "Mother, you don't understand the full context." "I understand enough," she interrupted. "I'm deeply disappointed. This is not how we raised you." My mother stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Rosalind, this isn't the appropriate setting for this discussion. You're embarrassing yourself and the family." "I'm not embarrassed," I replied calmly. "I'm simply stating facts." My Uncle Thomas, my father's younger brother, moved to stand beside me. "I think what Rosalind is saying is important for this family to hear. And speaking as someone who's been observing for years, I can confirm this pattern. I just never realized how deep it went." Charlotte finally found her voice. Roz, I had no idea. I mean, I knew mom and dad helped me with some things, but I didn't realize you weren't getting the same support. She turned to our parents. Did you really say those things to her? That she deserves less because she chose emergency medicine instead of cardiology? My father's face hardened. This is a gross mischaracterization of our parenting. We've always supported both our daughters. Unequally, I responded. And before you say life isn't always equal, I'll remind you that this isn't about equality in outcome. It's about equality in opportunity and support. I addressed the room once more. I'm not asking anyone to take sides. I'm simply letting you know that moving forward, I'll be establishing new boundaries with my parents. I've removed them as my emergency contacts. I won't be attending family events where this dynamic is allowed to continue. And I'll be building my life and career on my own terms without seeking approval I've never been able to earn. I turned back to Charlotte. I don't blame you for any of this. You didn't create this situation. I hope we can maintain our relationship separately from our parents. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. With nothing left to say, I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. As I reached the foyer, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find my grandmother, uncle, and two aunts following me out. "We're coming with you, dear," my grandmother said. "I think we all need to talk." As we left the house, I could hear raised voices behind us. The celebration was certainly over, but something new was beginning. Outside, my Uncle Thomas put his hand on my shoulder. "I should have said something years ago," he said. "I noticed how they treated you differently, but I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." "I have a proposition," he continued. "I'd like to help with your loans. Not all of them, I don't have that kind of money, but I could manage $1,000 a month toward your payments. It won't make everything equal, but it might help." I was stunned by his offer. "Uncle Thomas, that's incredibly generous, but you don't have to do that." "I want to," he insisted. "Consider it making amends for staying silent too long." My grandmother nodded in agreement. "And I'll be setting up a trust fund specifically for your education debt. It's not right what they've done, and while we can't fix it completely, we can start to balance the scales." For the first time that day, I felt tears threatening, not from pain or anger, but from the unexpected support of family members who had finally seen the truth and chosen to stand with me. In the weeks following the confrontation at Charlotte's party, my life underwent a transformation, both subtle and profound. The initial aftermath was painful, a deafening silence from my parents, followed by a carefully worded email 3 days later suggesting I had overreacted and misrepresented our family dynamic to relatives. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on my residency, throwing myself into the challenging and rewarding work of emergency medicine. The fast pace and variety of cases confirmed I had chosen the right specialty for my skills and temperament. While my colleagues complained about the long hours and high stress, I found purpose in the controlled chaos. Charlotte reached out first by text, then with a coffee invitation. When we met at a cafe midway between our hospitals, her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, stirring her latte absently. "Going over memories, conversations, patterns. I didn't see it before, but now I can't unsee it. They really did treat us differently. All those years when I thought I was just struggling more than you, needing more help, they were actually giving me advantages you never received." I nodded, letting her come to these realizations without pushing. "I talked to them," she continued. "They're still in denial, claiming they responded to our different needs appropriately. But when I pressed them on specifics, like why they paid for all my conference fees, but none of yours, they couldn't give straight answers." She reached across the table to take my hand. "I've made a decision. I'm going to help with your loans. I've calculated that I can afford to give you $2,000 a month. Over time, that will help balance some of the inequity." I was stunned by her offer. "Charlotte, you don't have to do that. This isn't your responsibility to fix." "I know," she said firmly, "but I benefited from their favoritism even unknowingly. And you're my sister. I love you, and I want us to have a relationship based on fairness going forward." I accepted her offer with tears in my eyes, recognizing it for what it was, not just financial help, but an acknowledgement of the truth and a commitment to change. Meanwhile, I worked with the hospital's financial advisor to enroll in a loan forgiveness program for physicians serving underserved communities. After 10 years working at Boston City Hospital, a significant portion of my remaining debt would be forgiven. It wasn't a complete solution, but combined with Charlotte's and Uncle Thomas's contributions, it made my debt feel manageable rather than crushing. A month after the confrontation, I received an unexpected email from Dr. Sarah Winters, the chief of emergency medicine at my hospital. She requested a meeting which I assumed would be about my residency performance. When I arrived at her office, she closed the door and got straight to the point. "I heard what happened with your family," she said. "Word travels in medical circles, and your father's colleague, Dr. Reynolds, is an old friend of mine." I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but Dr. Winters continued. "I'm not telling you this to embarrass you. I'm telling you because I want you to know that I see you, Rosalind. I see your exceptional work ethic, your clinical instincts, and your compassion for patients." She leaned forward. "I grew up with similar family dynamics. My brother was the golden child while I was constantly overlooked. It drove me to work twice as hard as everyone else, and that work ethic made me the physician I am today." For the first time, I felt truly seen by a mentor. Winters became an important figure in my professional development, providing opportunities and guidance that helped me excel in my residency program. With the support of my chosen family, my friends from medical school, my residency colleagues, Dr. Winters, and the relatives who had stood by me, I began to heal from decades of emotional neglect. I formed a support group for first-generation medical students and residents dealing with educational debt, turning my personal pain into a resource for others. My parents made several attempts at reconciliation, each more awkward than the last. The first was a dinner invitation that came with the caveat that we move forward without dwelling on the past. I declined. The second was a check for $10,000 with a note saying, "To help with your loans." I returned it with a letter explaining that this wasn't about money. It was about acknowledgement and change. 6 months after the confrontation, they requested a meeting. We met at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant near the hospital. My father spoke first. "We've been doing some reflection," he began hesitantly. "And while we don't agree with how you characterized our parenting, we recognize that you felt treated unfairly." It wasn't a full acknowledgement, but it was a start. "The thing is," I replied carefully, "this isn't about feelings. It's about documented actions and their impact. You gave one child significantly more financial and emotional support than the other. That's not a feeling, it's a fact." My mother sighed. "We never meant to hurt you, Rosalind." "Impact matters more than intent," I said, repeating a phrase Dr. Jensen had taught me. "And the impact of your choices will affect my financial